Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for USDA's Consensus Program briefing, Carbon Capture in Colorado and the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar today as part of our Consensus program. For those of you who do not know, my name is Alex Krauka. I am a consultant, Seattle-based consultant for USDA's Consensus program. Which was founded in 2008 and seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and stakeholders and build a consensus on the wide array of benefits of carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, and carbon management technologies. We do this in a variety of ways through briefings such as today's, which in non-COVID times would be live briefing in our offices in DC. We also host workshops as our briefings the workshops are now virtual. However, we hope to start having live in-person workshops as well. We also produce a series of reports and provide monthly news clips that give kind of an idea of what's going on in the CCUS and carbon management, hydrogen, rare earth elements and critical mineral spaces. Really a good plethora of information. If you have not already and would like to subscribe to our mailing list, please email my colleague Michelle Littlefield at mlittlefield@usda.org. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to our program director, Mike Moore.
Alex, thank you very much. We got quite a day today. All the activity that's been with energy prices, with new legislation, 45Q tax credits, new administration, energy transition. I can go down the list of things. And of course, out of that, things begin to move and take shape. But the real acid test is actually seeing pieces connect and get done. And today we've got quite a story. You've got the money behind the technology, the new technology, with a group that's going to deploy this, who's got an opportunity to deliver the output into a region of the country that can use zero to negative emission power, and to the governor's office, who has a keen interest in these things taking place in his state. So I'm going to turn this over to Damien Beauchamp, who is the president of Eight Rivers Capital. And for those that aren't connected to this, Eight Rivers Capital was the early money behind Net Power, which is a game-changing way of producing power and having zero emissions with the process that they use. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, to Damien, and let you paint this picture that is pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. So as Mike said, I appreciate everybody who's joining today. I appreciate my fellow panelists who are joining to discuss their various organizations and the leadership they're demonstrating in environmental stewardship to help the world achieve all the various net zero targets that are being set by countries and organizations all across the globe in the past few years. Having said that, it's quite exciting to see the developments that are happening within the Southern Ute Indian Tribe Reservation, as well as the state of Colorado. In this region of the world, there are some real game-changing technologies and projects taking shape, and there's quite a bit of synergy between those projects, the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, and the state of Colorado, and we're here to discuss those synergies, the projects, and the leadership that each of these organizations bring to the table. So I'm Damien, I'm with Eight Rivers Capital. We are a technology and project development firm focused on helping our clients achieve their net zero ambitions profitably. Joining me today is Shane Siebel, the Executive Director of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe Growth Fund, a very successful organization that has a wide reach with respect to energy, real estate, and other endeavors. Also joining us is Will Torr, who is the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office, and Cloud Letrono. And he is the CEO of Svante, which is developing and has developed, formerly Inventus, has developed a groundbreaking carbon capture technology. And he'll be talking about a project that's in development as well over in Florence, Colorado. So without too much further from me, I'm going to pass it to various colleagues here. Shane will lead off, and he will give us some understanding about the Southern Ute Indian Tribe's leadership in energy and environmental stewardship. They've actually already conducted a very successful and substantial carbon capture project in the past, which I think the world should take note of. And I will then discuss about Coyote Clean Power LLC, a zero emissions power generation project that we're developing in conjunction and in partnership with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. And Will Torr will then speak for the state of Colorado and its energy vision. And bringing it all home will be Cloud, CEO of Svante, to discuss the exciting industrial carbon capture project that they're working towards. So with no more from me, Shane, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Damien, for that. Thank you for the invite. United States Energy Association, really excited to be here as part of a panelist on this webinar. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so we can get to my presentation. So bear with me a little bit. So can you, everybody, confirm that you can see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Shane Seibel. I'm a Southern Ute tribal member. I'm the executive director of the Southern Ute Growth Fund. We have our title here, Carbon Capture and the Energy Transition. That's a big part of who we are as an energy nation within a nation here at the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. We take that responsibility very seriously. The agenda for today, you can see this is our elected officials. We have our tribal chairman in the middle there. He was recently elected, Mr. Melvin J. Baker. To his left is Vice Chairman, Mr. Valdez, and of course, surrounded by some lovely council women, very strong ladies within our tribe have been recently elected. I want to give a background on the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Growth Fund, who we are. We're going to talk a little bit about Coyote Clean Power Project, but not taking a whole lot because that's Damien's area. So don't want to steal his thunder, but it's very exciting for us as well. And other carbon capture projects that we had here on the reservation. And then provide some final thoughts. So Southern Ute history. You know, here we are. Our Southern Ute history is really encompasses 7 bands of Utes. Here for the Southern Utes, we are made up of 2 bands, the Moach Capote bands, which primarily our hunting territory was in Alamosa all the way down to Abiquiu, New Mexico, up through Colorado Springs and the Denver area. We were horse people, we were mountain people. That goes for all of the Utes. We really came from the mountains. We are the longest contiguous inhabitants within the state of Colorado. Our Ute culture was really based on living off the land and establishing a unique relationship with the ecosystem. So we made sure that we followed the seasons and making sure that we allowed those hunting grounds to replenish. So we didn't stay in one certain area for too long. We wanted to make sure that it was kind of a cyclical nature and take only what is required from the earth. We know that many of our older cultural traditions, they're still alive and practiced today. Just this past weekend, we had our bear dance, which is really unique to us Ute people. Our bear dance is, you know, due to COVID, typically it's done in May here. It's really the welcoming of the bear welcoming of spring. And so it was a very powerful ceremony for us. It includes our whole community. And so we always are very proud to continue that tradition on of bear dance. Bear dance in our language is Kuyaga, the bear, represents so many things that we hold dear to our heart. Rest during the winter, but also very strong, and the bear here has a great significance. The Sundance, we still participate in the Sundance. That came from the Plains nations, and found its way to us mountain people here as Southern Utes. And so we still participate in our cultural traditions. A little bit about the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. We have a little over 330,000 acres in the southwest portion of Colorado. Way back in the day, our elected officials understood that we were blessed with coal bed methane under our reservation. And so with that, we had two major questions. Number one, how do we fund our government in perpetuity? How do we do that? We had a lot of passive investments from our royalties and our severance taxes from operators operating on our reservation. But how do we solve for that funding of our government? The other one was, well, since we are an energy tribe, how do we diversify? How are we able to take our passive investments and be able to exercise our sovereignty, exercise what we want to do as a nation within a nation? And so with that, in 1999 and 2000, our leadership at that time developed a financial plan. And that financial plan really established some silos or some buckets. How do we govern ourselves? That sovereignty issue. Well, we called our permanent fund as our tribal government. One of our goals within that was to fund that in perpetuity. The other one was our business, which is our growth fund. That's what we call our growth fund. Of course, we have a casino operations, and we also have what we call our shared services, which does all our IT. But within these two major functions, major silos, we understood that they were so different. You can't run a government like a business, and you can't run a business like a government. Not one's better than the other. They were just different. They required different sets of rules, different actions, and the speed of business needed to conduct business in a good way. So we went out and attracted talent to do that, and really established the road that we're on today that led. We're just blessed in that way. We also stepped out in the early side of things and got into upstream, which is our upstream company. We call that Red Willow. They're still in operation today. And our midstream in 1994 on the reservation is called Red Cedar. And then we also really had an appetite for alternative energy. We knew that's going to be at the forefront. And what do you know? Here it is today. What that allowed us to do, being an energy tribe, was diversification. So we wanted to make sure that we had real estate. And right now we have real estate investments in 13 states across the United States. We also started a private equity fund, which is the definition of diversification. We're invested in over 100 funds within that, and just has done very well. Little bit about the Coyote Clean project. Damien's going to really hit on this quite a bit, but it's really a joint venture between the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and 8 Rivers Capital. What's the mission? We want to develop, construct, and operate a net power plant to produce electricity from natural gas and capture emissions. One of the things that I challenged our energy director here within the Growth Fund, I've been in this position for 2 years now, and was, how do we get to the burner tip? How are we able to produce a service or a product, sustainable product that we can use from our sourced gas here, from our natural gas that comes right off our reservation? And so that challenge she took it and brought this, and it's quite exciting. And we have a couple of things here. It's located on an 18-acre brownfield site. We're really leveraging our proximity to existing infrastructure. It's already there. We have a CO2 pipeline that when we capture the CO2, we can put it in a pipeline to be used. Power lines. We have transmission power lines from Wapat and Tri-State right there in the vicinity. And of course, we have our existing natural gas transmission lines. We wanted to leverage infrastructure expertise from the tribe's oil and gas business. We already have that expertise, and we have the talent necessary to really move this project forward. NEPA permitting and reservoir capabilities for carbon sequestration. And right now that Coyote Clean project is targeting 284 megawatts of baseload power. Wow. Capturing 97% of our CO2 emissions. That's a big, big deal. This kind of runs parallel to the tribe. You know, the tribe, we're all about not only giving acknowledgement to the creator of all things, but, you know, making sure that we take care of the land. That's our responsibility here on the reservation, helping come up with solutions to things that have taken place. And one of them is, you know, we have methane seeps due to the outcrop, to the fruitland coal outcrop. And these seeps happen along the outcrop, and they date back hundreds of years, even before us as the Southern Utes established our reservation here. You know, we collected data and wanted to understand how we can help eliminate or kind of slow down the seeps in our outcrop, because it affected our whole community. You can see that outcrop as it comes around and goes outside of the reservation. And those are the things that we wanted to really study. I have a short video here that is kind of really kind of cool to see, you know, what that methane spot looks like. You can see in this video, and this came from our Department of Energy. You can see it naturally seeping from that outcrop. And that goes to right to our environment. And we wanted to make sure that we understood what was taking place, what we could do to help prevent that or slow it down. And I thought this video is real significant in the things that we're trying to do as a tribe to help provide solutions. So we had a methane capture project over a 10-year period. The tribe intercepted methane through vent wells prior to the methane venting along that fruitland outcrop. So before it went out the air, we were able to collect it in existing oil and gas infrastructure. We treated it and we sold it downstream on the market. Successfully sold carbon credits equating to over 420,000 metric tons of CO2. That's equivalent to consuming 47 million gallons of gasoline or 91.3 thousand vehicles for 1 year. So it was substantial in being able to capture that methane. Right now, we're in the process of going to what we call a vent well capture 2.0. And so we're actually looking at new ways to be able to capture that methane and to be able to use our existing infrastructure to help also tie right into our Coyote Clean project. So you can see we have what it does to our environment. You know, that seep really kills the vegetation and displacement of the oxygen in the root system. So, you know, we're helping make sure that we take care of Mother Earth in that way. A couple final comments. You know, Indian tribes, you know, I call them nations within a nation, are just more than just landowners. And energy has historically brought value to our reservation. And as Southern Utes, we're very blessed to understand that that value comes with expectations, and it comes with things that we have to step up and do. Our tribe has really taken on that responsibility, and we continue to move forward with that. And the Southern Utes here, we embrace new ideas, including new technology and carbon capture to meet our future challenges. We want to be a part of the solution. We understand that we are an oil and gas tribe, but that doesn't mean that we're not open to new technology, and we definitely are going down that road. We embrace regional resources with an all of the above approach to achieve net zero energy deployment. That's who we are as Southern Ute people. We have that relationship within our community, and that responsibility within our world that we all live in. And so we want to make sure that we're able to do that. And that's the end of my presentation. And I look forward to any questions afterwards, and I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Shane, excellent presentation. Really appreciate your taking the time to educate everybody on the important history of the tribe and the things that are most important, as well as the tremendous success you all have achieved, not only in monetizing your energy assets on reservation, but also in your environmental stewardship. I think you guys were really ahead of the curve with the methane capture program, with the documentation of that non-anthropogenic seeping that was occurring, and your ability to mitigate that is super meaningful. Having said that, I'm going to get into the Coyote Clean Power project now that you so wonderfully touched on. Let me just find the file to share here, which, let's see. There we go. All right. So as Shane touched on, I'm Damian Beauchamp. I am with 8 Rivers Capital, President and Chief Development Officer, and I have been leading the way with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe in the development of our joint venture, the Coyote Clean Power project, which looks to deliver clean, reliable, and affordable energy to the Southern Ute Indian Reservation, Southern Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and we're even able to get that power all the way to California. And so we at 8 Rivers are honored to have begun building a relationship with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, and are very appreciative of their trust in where we've gotten to date. And so together we look to forge ahead. There may be other partners that join within this project vehicle that we've called Coyote Clean Power. But for right now, it is 8 Rivers and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. And we're looking to, as Shane mentioned, develop, construct, and operate a 284 megawatt electric near zero emissions power plant. Again, it will capture all of its CO2, ultimately sequestering 97% on the Southern Ute Indian Tribe on a brownfield site. That's an absolute wonderful location for maximizing the economics of a carbon capture based project. And we're targeting first fire of our project in 2025. So about 4 years from now. There are several benefits to the Coyote Clean Power project. One, the power system that's being utilized, which I will touch on, is more energy efficient. It uses less natural gas to achieve the same electrical output that a natural gas combined cycle with carbon capture would be able to achieve. The system is able to do what other carbon capture, post-combustion carbon capture systems are not able to achieve, and that is to operate water-free. neither consuming nor producing any water. The system does not produce, we don't have to worry about capturing or mitigating. It does not produce NOx, SOx, or particulate. It is climate proof because 97% of all the emissions never touch the atmosphere. And it's flexible with ready ramping capability as well as energy storage. And I'll touch on that momentarily. And so what does this CCP facility look to employ from a technology perspective? Well, it's the net power technology, and net power is based on the Allen-Fetvet cycle, which was a thermodynamic cycle invented by some of my colleagues here at 8 Rivers back in and around 2010. That technology for natural gas was licensed to Net Power to commercialize around the world. And so Coyote Clean Power looks to utilize that technology. In addition to producing zero emissions electricity, which is shown towards the bottom of the screen, we take in natural gas and we're able to produce electricity. We'll also produce clean and valuable CO2 for transport and sequestration or other utilization purposes. But in addition, because it's an oxy-fired system, so pure oxygen coming from an air separation unit is fed to the Allen-Fetvet cycle, combusted with natural gas. We have this nice air separation unit to provide that oxygen. And we also are able to produce co-products such as argon, nitrogen, and some additional oxygen. And these products have various uses in a number of industries, which are shown to the right. The way the cycle works is we combust pure oxygen with natural gas through a combustor, produce power through a turbine, extract the heat. And the heat recuperation is extremely important for being able to achieve the energy efficiency. Also, we're using CO2 as the working fluid, and CO2 is a wonderful medium for transferring and carrying heat efficiently through our system. The width of these lines are proportional to mass, and it just shows you just how much CO2 is actually recycling in the system. So as it's coming out of the turbine, it's going through a heat exchanger. The heat exchanger is absorbing heat on the hot end and then transferring that heat on the cold end back to the CO2 that has passed through the compressor and pump system. The nice thing about CO2 is its supercritical properties allow for you to use pumping rather than pure compression. And pumping is a smaller parasitic load when compared to compression. So we're able to save some internal energy consumption by exploiting the supercritical nature of CO2, the pumpability, if you will, of it. Because we're combusting, ultimately we do have to produce some CO2. This CO2 comes out at pipeline quality and pressure, and is able to come out at pipeline quality and pressure, which is quite valuable from a carbon capture system perspective. Additionally, we will produce some liquid water coming out of the heat exchanger, and that water will be used in an evaporative cooling mechanism to achieve our water-free ambitions. The CO2 that's coming out of the compressor and pump will gain heat from the heat exchanger, come back to the combustor through the turbine, producing more energy. And so that's a brief technological description of the technology we look to employ. Because there is a parasitic load going to the air separation unit, we're producing this oxygen. As renewable assets come online, we are able to turn down our power facility and reduce the parasitic load going to the air separation unit from the power island. We would be able to take electricity from the grid to generate oxygen. And because we've turned down the power cycle, we're not consuming all of the oxygen we produce. We can store some in an oxygen tank. Then later, when renewables go down, we can reduce the load going to the air separation unit from the AF cycle power system, and we can take some oxygen from the tank that was stored previously using renewable electricity. What this allows us to do is flex between 284 megawatt electric to the grid to 300 megawatt electric in very short order. I like to call this the world's biggest and baddest battery, more in the form of a molecular energy storage mechanism by storing oxygen from the air separation unit. This is going to be important in the region, primarily because of all the retirement of the coal assets and the increasing deployment of intermittent renewable assets that will not only need stable baseload power, but energy storage mechanisms. The location, as Shane mentioned, is an absolute wonderful one. In that we have excellent transmission distribution infrastructure, 1.7 miles to the east, 2 miles to the south. We have CO2 pipelines. It's a brownfield site. You can see it there in the picture. It houses a biogas refining complex as well as a gas processing facility, which means that it's already got a small switch yard for power for construction, as well as natural gas infrastructure piped to the site. It's wonderful having a project partner who has the gas supply that's required, as well as the site and control over permitting. We think that we're going to really be able to maximize the economic return for the partners and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe because of these advantages. So this is the exact layout of the site with the site boundary as it currently stands, and what we're anticipating our plot to look like with the alum FETVET cycle unit, as well as auxiliary systems and tanks that we see being required to deploy this asset. The maroon line is an existing power line that's coming into an electrical switch yard on site. We've got our natural gas pipeline coming in blue, a proposed CO2 pipeline using an existing right-of-way for that natural gas pipeline, as well as some unprocessed gas that would come in potentially from the outcrop. And if this zero emission facility takes gas that would have otherwise been vented to the atmosphere, we're targeting being the world's first negative emissions power generation facility. Now, that kind of leads into Will and Cloud here. So I wanted to really bring this whole thing into perspective. And why are these groups on the phone? Well, this CCP project is a partnership between 8 Rivers and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and is on the tribe's sovereign land. At the same time, to the west of the project, we have the outcrop, which Shane wonderfully kind of outlined, and I quite enjoyed the video. I hadn't seen that. We look to take potentially that methane into CCP, produce the world's first negative emissions power, and there is potential with appropriate partnership from local utilities in the state of Colorado to deliver power to the Svante LafargeHolcim industrial complex that's also capturing CO2, which would further improve the CO2 abatement from that project as well. And so it looks like there's a real center of gravity from a carbon capture perspective taking shape in the state of Colorado, which perhaps could serve to mitigate some of the elevated power prices we've seen from less diverse clean energy mandates that other states have demonstrated. And so I believe that there's by my estimates, there's over 3 million tons of CO2 capture per annum between all of these projects, these 3 projects you see on the screen, were they to be working in unison. Having said that, I look forward to any questions. That is the end of my presentation. And I would like to pass it to Will Torr, the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office, to discuss the state's vision.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one thing, Will, I will say, we very much appreciated the governor's wonderful comment on our press release when we announced our partnership with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. And so very much appreciate that.
Thank you, Damien. Excited to be here. And I know the governor was very excited when he learned about that project. just to give a little bit of the context from the state perspective, back in 2019, our legislature for the first time adopted state climate targets. So we now have legislatively adopted goals of a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases below 2005 levels by 2030 and a 90% reduction by 2050. The governor charged the Energy Office to work with sort of all of the other relevant agencies, as well as sort of technical consultants and a public stakeholder process to develop the state's GHG roadmap that really lays out a sector by sector approach to how are we going to achieve those targets, with a special focus on 2030, where we feel like we can have the biggest impact over the next decade. And in that roadmap, there are a number of things that stood out. First is that certainly in the near term, the biggest opportunities for emissions reduction are in the arena of electricity generation. And we are now on a pathway where utilities that represent more than 99% of fossil generation in the state are on a pathway to at least an 80% emission reduction by 2030. For that sort of near-term planning, primarily what we see utilities focused on is really retiring older and more expensive coal generation and replacing it primarily with wind, solar, battery storage, and gas combustion turbines that operate at a very low capacity factor, so are important for providing reliability, but have actually very low emissions because they're simply not operated very often. As part of that analysis, however, it also was clear that, well, that works for our 2030 goals, that to get to our deeper reduction goals in 2050, that we're going to need at least a 95% decarbonized power grid, combined with production of a lot more electricity in order to use that clean electricity for vehicles and building electrification, and in some cases, industrial electrification. And that achieving that was really going to require some form of firm zero carbon generation. And as a state, we've been somewhat agnostic on the technology. I think the way that we've framed it is that there are a number of different potential technology pathways where there's a lot of activity and a lot of excitement, and we don't yet know ultimately, as these things are deployed at scale, which ones are going to be most affordable and which ones are going to work best in which circumstance. But we certainly see the array of important technologies, including gas with carbon capture, so projects like the Salem Cycle Net Power project. We see the hydrogen potentially playing an important role with using renewables to hydrolyze water, and then running that hydrogen through combustion turbines as a potential technology, for instance, in some of the communities like Craig or Hayden, where there's a lot of transmission and there's water rights associated with coal plants that has been used for the cooling, but the plants are retiring. We certainly think that it's quite possible that small modular reactors, if they really play out and become available and affordable, could play a role. And maybe there are other forms of long duration storage that will end up being a piece of this. So we're, I think, very supportive and very open to deployment of all of these technologies, and seeing which ones are really able to be affordable enough to be deployed at scale. As we were doing the analysis on the roadmap, our technical consultants initially viewed carbon capture primarily as a post-2030 strategy, so that in their analysis they were showing sort of very low levels of carbon capture as we move to, meet that 2030 50% goal. But what we started hearing from many industrial players was, wait a minute, we're actually working on real projects right now, and we don't see this as something that's waiting till after 2030 to be deployed at a scale that's large enough to make a difference. So coming out of that, the state has formed a carbon capture task force that has representation from industry, labor unions, local government, environmental community, and sort of the relevant regulators from our Oil and Gas Commission and our Department of Public Health and Environment, that is meeting this year and will be coming out with a report to the governor by the end of the year, that will really be focused on what is the potential role that carbon capture can play in meeting our greenhouse gas targets during this decade, and what type of sort of regulatory change, programs, or state investment may be needed in order to get those benefits. So we are, I would say, in a fairly early stage at the state and really wrapping our arms around all of the potential benefits and potential role that carbon capture can play. And again, we'll likely be coming forward with sort of administrative and legislative proposals for how to make sure that state policy is supporting achieving those benefits. And so I would anticipate, for instance, that we will have an active conversation about state primacy on Class 6 injection wells. And in fact, there was a piece of legislation this year that directed our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to conduct a study of that this year, so that we would be ready next year if legislation is needed on that topic. Just a couple of other things that I would say here. We had another piece of legislation that passed this year, House Bill 1266, that is a fairly comprehensive climate bill that, among other things, created a legal requirement for industrial emissions reduction. It requires our state air commission to conduct rulemakings between now and the end of 2023 to ensure that across the industrial sector, we achieve at least a 20% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030 below 2005 levels. And that rulemaking process, there's an initial rule that is under development right now, but there will probably be 2 more rulemakings over the next 2 years. And I think thinking through what's the role of carbon capture in that is going to be very important. When we look at the scale of emissions reductions, a 20% reduction below 2005 levels in the industrial sector is sort of a net reduction of about 3 million tons annually. And because there's been growth in the interim, the actual sort of gross reductions required are likely going to be more in that 5 million ton range, although there's more work that needs to be done to quantify that. But when you talk about the potential for 2 or 3 million tons of reduction from just a couple of large CCUS projects, it certainly captures our attention that this could be a really important part of the puzzle for both thinking through our long-term approach in electricity, but also those industrial emissions reductions. And then, I think the only other thing that I would say is I think we're super excited about, this potential for zero carbon firm generation coming into the mix, in potentially the next few years, as opposed to 2030, and starting to try to understand how that may play into all of the utility clean energy plans that will be moving through our Public Utility Commission, that, again, I think to date have been very much focused on retire coal, replace it with renewables, back them up with gas combustion turbines. But if there's a potential to be adding firm zero carbon generation into that mix, it certainly has our attention, and we're very excited to learn more as these projects move forward and figure out how they fit into that broader context. And with that, I will pass it on.
Thank you, Will, so much for that discussion and the vision of the state. And it is exciting to see things accelerating beyond what we've seen as expectation in the market. And I think that Colorado is taking a very pragmatic approach to ensure that the cost of electricity and goods don't elevate such that consumers can't afford them. And so I think that these projects represent a great step in that, and the government of Colorado and your office have really been a leader, I think, in the United States overall. And so thank you so much for taking the time to join. Last but not least, and a project I'm very excited about is Claude and Svante. I would say, Claude, take your time on this. I know we've run over a bit. I think we'll still have plenty of time for questions, but this is a project and a technology worth hearing about, and it's, I think, extremely exciting. So Claude, thank you so much for taking the time and the willingness to join. Please.
Well, thank you, Damien, and thank you, Mike, for the invitation. I'm very proud to be on that panel. You can see the slide deck, yes? Great. Okay, I'll be talking about how to build a CO2 marketplace in Colorado. So just a bit of feedback on the company itself. We are a pure play in carbon capture, and we are focusing on hard to abate industries and helping them to provide a solution to achieve a net zero emission at the plant level. So we're very conscious about the energy we consume to do the carbon capture, both to make the steam or to make the electricity. And we are looking forward to see if there's any partnership that can be done and leveraging the expertise of Net Power. So we are based in Vancouver. We have about 100 people. We've been in development stage since 2007. I've attracted more than $175 million US, of which we closed a Series D a few months ago of $100 million to industrialize and be ready to commercialize our technology at the scale of 1 million, 1.5 million ton per year CO2 capture plant by the end of 2023. So right around the corner. We have a very broad investor base. About 37% are energy producer worldwide, blue chip players, of which OGCI, for those who are less familiar, they represent the 13 largest oil and gas or energy players in the world, the Shell, the BP, the Total. And we're the only investment they made in developing a carbon capture solution for second generation. We also were able to attract in our Series D a lead investor with Temasek, who's probably one of the largest sovereign funds in the world, and Chart, who's now very active in being a strategic investors and also partners to provide liquefaction and technology that is complementary to our plate. So just a quick set on what's a net zero, what does it mean? We all see the curve of 40 gigaton of CO2 that is being emitted worldwide in all industries and power. That curve needs to go down to at least 10 gigaton. So electric vehicle, renewable, energy efficiency is all needed. Nobody is competing, it's all needed. And carbon capture as a play for about 10 gigaton in that reduction. So when you avoid having CO2 going out in the atmosphere, it's called carbon capture. And when you need to remove CO2 from the air to be net zero, so if you have 10 residual, then you need to have 10 gigaton negative emission. That's called carbon removal. So we play on both sides, helping one of our partner in Europe, Climeworks, lower the cost of their system on their air capture system. But our focus as a company, market-wise, is to be on the capture side of it. But both technology needs basically to do something with CO2, and what we see in terms of massive amount of CO2 to be managed, 10 gigaton storage in our mind is the only alternative today economically that can be done. There will be some application about utilization, but not to the scale required to the size of these plants. So when you look today at where we are as an industry worldwide, there's about 40 million tons. So this is 40 plants of 1 million ton each. The Colorado project, to put things in perspective, is about 1.5 million tons. So it's about 40 plants equivalent or so of what Colorado would be. And it's been primarily captured from natural gas processing. So upstream natural gas, you're removing the CO2 to make pipeline grade natural gas. On the post-combustion side, where we play, very little has been done. And the task is to have 10 gigatons. So 10 gigaton is 10,000 plant of 1 million ton. So we have to go from 40 plants to 10,000 plant. So if, and the market that IEA sees worldwide, it will be primarily a North American play with some application a bit in Europe and Australia because of the low cost of energy in North America, and also because of the storage capacity that we have. So where would that 10 gigaton be deployed? Obviously, power plants is a major portion of it that you see there, coal, gas, or biomass power plants. We tend to be focusing our entry in the market on hydrogen to make blue hydrogen from natural gas, cement. As an industry, it's probably 7 to 8% of CO2 emission is coming from cement factories around the world, and also direct air capture. So eventually we'll tackle the power plants, but for the moment we're focusing on these industrial. So just to put things in perspective, what 10 gigaton means. So if somebody has the ambition of having 1 gigaton, and he wants to dominate the market with 1 gigaton of carbon capture, it's the size of the oil and gas industry today in reverse. So 10 gigaton is the same economical value of building plants and economical value of moving oil in dollar. That's what 10 gigaton is. So if you want to do 1 gigaton, you basically want to be the size of Shell, BP, Total, Exxon all together. It is mind-boggling, 10,000 ton. So let's go and talk about the first one. So what's our value prop? Our value prop is we are addressing the high cost aspect of carbon capture, which is the capital investment. It represents more than 2/3 of the capital cost today of conventional liquid system. And we're trying to reduce the cost of the capital investment by about half by taking a liquid based system, which has been proven. You can see it requires large towers and a heat exchanger, three major pieces of equipment. And we do all this in a single piece of equipment that we call a rotary absorption machine. And to be able to do so, we have a unique filter. So we've nano-engineered a powder that can selectively catch CO2 versus nitrogen. And that's how you capture the CO2 from a flue gas. And we take that powder and we put it on a very thin laminate, and we stack the laminate to make a filter, similar to a filter you would have in your vacuum system. And that filter now is then put into a machine that slowly rotates 1 rotation per minute. So we have 3 major sections that are sealed. So the first one is you have the flue gas coming from the top, and it goes through the filters. In a few seconds, will catch all the CO2 and then release the nitrogen. And then when the filter moves into the second section, you're pushing steam from the bottom, and the steam gets absorbed inside the filter and create a temperature increase that releases the CO2. And so that's done in a few seconds. And then you need to remove the residual water, and you do it in the back end of it by pushing air. So that cycle of catch, release, and catch and release is done every minute. in a very rapid temperature swing. And that's the novelty of our technology. So we've built a demonstration plant in Canada at Husky Energy. You can see it's a plant capable of doing 30 tons per day. It's a small plant, 10,000 ton a year. But nevertheless, you can see that this is quite larger scale equipment. And if you look on the right side, you will see that the equipment is inside a building where the rest of the balance of plant is installed. So we have more than just that plant. We have this plant on the top left side. On the bottom left side, we have a 1 ton per day today running at one of the LafargeHolcim plant in Vancouver, demonstrating its operability in a harsh environment of cement flue gas, which has a lot of impurities like SOx. And we also have 2 laboratory units, one in Vancouver and one in France at Total, who have been testing the technology and getting comfortable with the performance of our system. And we have currently under construction a plant of a similar size at Husky. This one is at Chevron in San Juan Valley in California. And this will be about a 25 tons per day plant that will be up and running in about 12 months now. So that being said, I want to explain here maybe the economics, and size matters on these capture plants to be able to meet what the market can afford. And currently you have in the world what I call carrots and stick. So the carrot is tax credit, what government refers in the United States as a 45Q tax credit of about $35 to $50 per ton. And you have in other countries in the world a stick, like Canada, who is putting to want to put a stick of $170 Canadian, which would be about $135 US as a price. And with the carrot and the stick, you need to find a way of monetizing your CO2. Yes. So the bigger your plant is, the more efficient is your capital investment, and the cost of capital recovery becomes less and less. So if you have a very, very small plant like the demo ones we have right now, those are typically 1 to 30 tons per day, you will be in the hockey stick portion of that curve on the right side. Liquidity mean tends to be higher than ours simply because of the capital cost difference. So when you move into a steam boiler, which you have a lot in the industries, there tend to be like smaller plant, 500 to 1,000 ton per day. When you move to blue hydrogen, the biggest plant will be about 3,000 tons a day. Average is about 1,000. And cement and lime are typically all the way up to 4,500. So the LafargeHolcim is at the far end of that spectrum. That's a big cement factory. Most plant will probably be lower than 3,000 tons per day scale. And then power plants, either coal or natural gas, tend to be more in the 10 to 20,000 tons per day. And this is an area where the first generation liquid amine will be more adequate to treat these types of systems. So we're focusing on smaller plant and trying to make the economics work. And you can see our curve crosses basically the $50 threshold in the range of 1,000 to 3,000 tons per day. For a big liquid amine system, they would have to be more in the 10 to 20,000 tons to cross the line of $50 per ton. So we believe that the price of these projects will go up and up, because that you need to take care also of the cost of storage and transportation. So 45Q enhancement is a must in the United States to get these projects off the ground and be able to increase this. So we tend to look at North America this way. Our first approach was to leverage existing CO2 pipeline infrastructure. So every blue line you see on that map in Canada and US are existing CO2 pipeline. Most of them were taking CO2 from natural reservoir and moving it down to EOR site for enhanced oil recovery. Every blue point is a cement factory. So we have plenty of choices before we pick this one. And every yellow one is a hydrogen plant that can be converted to blue hydrogen. So we focus on the Permian, and the dot that you see in the Permian at the top of one of the line there is the Colorado project we're looking at. So, and there is probably new big pipelines being developed in the United States. At the top level on the right side, you'll see in area 5, in purple, in the Midwest. A navigator is looking at with BlackRock to develop a major pipeline infrastructure, but that's to basically collect the CO2 from the ethanol plants all lined up in that region. So coming to our project in Colorado, we took an approach of having all the stakeholders looking at the project from the get-go, and developing, taking away all the commercial barriers and talking to each other in an open book manner, so we can really find a way of making this project economical for everybody. So Lafarge is the emitter. Occidental is the off-taker, taking the CO2 to manage the CO2 storage. We are the technology provider, and we selected Kiewit as our EPC partner to do the design and construction. Total was brought in as well so that they could provide their expertise through sun power in looking at renewable, because these plants, this particular plant of 1.5 million ton requires about 60 megawatt of power. So you're looking at generating 285 megawatt. We would take 60 megawatt continuously 24/7, and we're looking for carbon-free electricity. So right now we are looking at solar, which will be oversized so that we can demonstrate on a 24-hour basis that it is carbon-free. So we're oversizing the solar to about 180 megawatt sizes. We could easily look at relying on a net power project to do all the power generation closer to our need. So this is the plant location. You can see there's a quarry. There's plenty of space to do solar there if need be. In terms of the storage site, we've looked at 3 options. First one is to look within a radius of 10 miles from the plant. You can see it in the blow up on the top right side. There is the Florence field that was looked at, but the permeability of it is 20 times less than what you would have at the Sheep Mountain Natural Reservoir. So not making it the most economical way of having local storage in close to the plant. We then looked at building a pipeline extension of about 40 miles to the Sheep Mountain pipeline. You can see the connection here in the red dot. And we would reverse the flow and now be able to put CO2 back into the natural reservoir, in the Sheep Mountain Natural Reservoir, as opposed to pulling CO2 out of it. So this project could be a catalyst to create a major CO2 hub to reverse basically the flow going back into these natural reservoirs. And if you look on the left side, I think I'm trying to position here the 2 reservoirs for the 2 projects. Your project, CCP, is more relying on the Kinder Morgan Gore-Tex pipeline, and at the top of it, you also have some reservoir for a natural reservoir for storage. But you can see that those cannot be necessarily connected, but eventually it could be connected if you were to flow the CO2 all the way down to Denver City hubs for EOR application. But I think if I was on the government side of Colorado, I would want to make sure that we reverse the flow of these pipelines and we use the Sheep Mountain pipeline as a natural storage of CO2 and reverse the flow to these reservoirs. So the challenge for us is different ways. First of all, we need to have access to low-cost electricity. Colorado right now, for that particular plant, is offering power non-carbon free at about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, uneconomical for a carbon capture plant. It needs to be less than 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's what solar power would give us. We need to have access to water for cooling water purposes, and the river itself has the capacity, but it is at the limit. So if we had a source of water coming from, let's say, net power, that would be fantastic. So you probably net power, your generation of water would be about twice what we need. So that could be a nice fit. And we also need to find a way of getting economical way of transporting and storing the CO2. So this is there's a lot of work a lot of pieces to put together. And in doing it, we need to also a vehicle to build this plant and own this plant. So we're looking now and working with Lafarge to see if a model where carbon capture as a service could be looked at, and where it would be an independent company that would basically get the flue gas from the cement factory, and then it would basically provide the CO2 compress pure CO2 to Oxy that would then pipe and store the CO2. And that carbon capture as a service company would then buy the technology from Svante, use an EPC to construct, and get all the financing in place to build and operate that facility. So as you can see, a lot of moving parts, but at least now we're doing it in collaboration. And I'm very glad to see that now we have government official from Colorado looking at it and aware of the issues to develop this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. That's it's a wonderful project that you all are developing, and certainly an exciting one. And I very much appreciate your pointing out the synergy of the water that is naturally produced from a net power system. And so thank you for that. You know, the other thing I want to touch on, which you had me thinking about through your presentation, was the ability for local sequestration and just how important that can be. And I will say that at Coyote Clean Power, we're certainly looking at and quite like the option of pure sequestration local to our project, both from an environmental and economic perspective. I think one of the most important parts of the early stages of this, what is a budding and blooming carbon capture industry, is to ensure that those who have the ability to take the CO2 responsibly today and sequester it, do so in an economically advantageous, beneficial way that allows the industry to grow into what it can be, rather than stifle it from the beginning by looking at a massive potential economic upside in the near term, but rather have the long play on the gigaton scale. And so I think that's all coming into focus. And I'd like to pause there, pass it back to Mike. Thank you, everybody, for joining today and taking this time. Will, I know you might have to drop here in a few minutes because of your time constraints. But if there are any questions, I pass it back to Mike to moderate those.
Well, first off, I got 3 pages of questions myself, so we don't have to worry about that part. Will, you've only got a few minutes, so I'm going to do this. After what you've heard, and you've had your piece to talk, and you've heard Claude speak again and more, is there anything you'd like to add while we've got your attention? And also any questions you would like to ask the other panelists?
Yeah. So I think my main questions would be to try to understand more about the role that you would see for the state in either of these projects, whether there are obstacles that you see that existing state, legal or regulatory constructs that are getting in the way that we should understand, or whether there are sort of drivers that you would like to see from the state that we should also understand.
I mean, from our project, I think I would say that the developing a PPA will be key. A private, a partnership for power, and I think this will be key. So helping in that area will be, to me, a showstopper or no showstopper if we can organize this PPA in a way that we get 4 cents per kilowatt hour when the regulated power today is at 8 cents in Colorado. So that's number one.
And do you know what utility service territory is the project in?
BHE.
Okay.
BHE, yeah. So that's one. But there's avenues and there's an open dialogue, but I think this is something where I think will be the state can probably help into it. The permitting aspect of it as well, of this project from an industrial permitting and also from getting the rights for the pipeline construction in the Colorado. So I think those would be the area. Obviously, we're building here a pipeline just for $1.5 million, and there'll be other users eventually that can rely on it. So I think if it opens up the concept of a CO2 hub in Colorado using an existing natural reservoir, that's a big deal to me. And I think it would benefit because now you have other states next door, or even other industrial right at the edge of Colorado and Texas, who would benefit from that storage site being developed. So economic of scale is the key to all of these things. Like Damien says, it's a long-term vision.
Yeah, and I would reiterate what Claude mentioned there, especially towards the end. You know, the primacy also that you mentioned, Will, which Wyoming has received. I think that would be important for the state of Colorado, because again, between Sheep Mountain and other CO2 hubs, there's already proof that CO2 will safely stay sequestered in these domes, because it took anthropogenic intervention to extract that CO2, and surely we can, by anthropogenic means, ensure that it doesn't escape as well. And so I think those resources, as well as the expertise that the Southern Ute Indian Tribe has in its oil and gas operations, and reinjection of, say, other gases, certainly come into play here, and offer an opportunity for a whole new industry to grow, a new tax base to grow of industries within the state of Colorado. You know, I think you guys have probably seen your uplift from cannabis, and you know, CO2 sequestration could certainly be on the horizon, and perhaps have some really great environmental benefits.
Great, thank you.
So a very quick high-level observation. There's a heck of a lot of rural economic development going on with all these projects. So I don't know where the state sets, or where we are at a federal level with the opportunity zones, or any of the special economic zones that have been created for various purposes across the country and statewide. But I've got to think that somebody's going to be sitting down with a pad of paper connecting dots for other industries that can come in and hub around where zero or negative emission power is being created in these rural areas. I mean, these plants don't, none of this stuff gets built in a metropolitan area or the suburbs. So this is all rural economic development right off the top. With these needs come the needs for high-speed broadband internet access as well to run the systems. It's like a big magnet. But I got one question, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of a fun one. If you're going to be producing negative emission power at Coyote Power, what color hydrogen do you produce? Because zero emissions is green, and you're negative emissions. So you must be like neon green.
Yeah, well, you know, if that methane were to be used to produce hydrogen.
Well, thank you very much. By the way, I saw you, Damien.
Yeah, you know, one of the ways that 8 Rivers has thought about this, you know, you've got your blue, you've got your gray, you've got your green, you've got your turquoise that's generated from nuclear through electrolysis. The negative emissions hydrogen generation, I would say, is that gold hydrogen that has evaded everybody to date. And so, you know, perhaps that's on the horizon. I would like to add that with respect to these zones and these hubs, you know, the Southern Ute Indian Reservation has a really wonderful piece of infrastructure and a large piece of fiber that runs through it. And there certainly is potential for some of these big data players that are looking to reduce their emissions to set down a data center. And I think on the horizon, there can be potentially some redundancy built into the region, which will be important for a data center. And data centers don't necessarily matter where they sit, as long as there is that redundancy and reliable power, which we have. The other thing I want to mention is that Coyote Clean Power sits in an opportunity zone, which allows for investors to come in and park their capital gains in the project for 10 years of the project and put their money to good work, good financial work, rather than, simply paying all those capital gains. They can actually put it to work for the environmental benefits that projects like this produce.
So, and again, all the pieces dropping into this place, into this region, and Claude, you with your project there and how you will connect the dots over to Sheep Mountain, it's pretty cool. And I don't think a lot of people have seen Colorado as this the frontline state where these dots are all getting connected. And I'd be happy to run this thing 2 or 3 more times to people we know as the word gets out. For your side, I've been around the CCS stuff since a little over the year 2000 when I kind of got into it, came from the commodity side. And the draw was the guys are buying CO2 for EOR, and there's other guys trying to penalize people for having CO2, and commodities, it's a natural arbitrage. One wants it, the other one doesn't, and there's a price play in the middle. What's still that arbitrage is still going on today, just showing up as big equipment. For a power plant, the emissions that come from a pulverized, maybe a supercritical, ultracritical pulverized coal-fired power plant, which coal is the 4-letter word for a lot of people, but at the end of the day, it's a valuable resource if you handle it the right way. So we'll stop there. But what, with your technology, are the emission streams that are the gold standard of emissions that make your capture technology work best, and the other extreme? What's the sweet spot?
So the sweet spot, that's a very good question. So our sweet spot is, let's say, ideally 20% CO2 concentration in a gas, where you see this in a blue hydrogen environment. So
Sure.
steam methane reformer, so that's the sweet spot. Lime and cement represents about 14-16%. That's also a very sweet spot for us. And the size of these plants are all small. So we feel that we're in a zone where liquid amines, which is the first generation, shines more in power plants, large facilities, and diluted stream that you find in a gas power plant, for example, at 3.5-4%. So we tend to stay away from power plants because they're big and more diluted. Coal, we don't want to work with it for the moment, even though it could fit. It's a 16% CO2 concentration, but I think there's plenty of tension between renewable and coal, so we're trying to stay away from it for the moment. And then I think boilers is on the edge of our applicability, but we have different sorbent to play with. So I would say natural gas boiler, SMR, and steam, and lime and cement.
Right, and yours, the CO2 stream is coming off the kilning process, or both the ability to the heat from the kilning, but also the output from the kilning.
So every site is specific, but in the cement industry, there is a bit of waste heat recovery you could do, but not as much. So we do take advantage of it, but it doesn't change drastically the economics of it. So we have to generate our own steam because they don't have any excess steam. So what we do is we burn natural gas in a boiler, and we recover the CO2 from the flue gas of that boiler, and we mix it with the flue gas from the cement factory. So at
from
least
the kiln, right?
From the kiln. So that area is at least we're not generating more CO2 than we capture. And then the thing to resolve now is the power. And if we have carbon-free power at less than 4 cents, then bingo, you're net zero.
You and the data guys are going to be duking it out for that 4-cent power. I was just working with some folks at the one of the agencies about we've got this massive data processing hockey stick taking place right now. Data centers, 5 of the data centers being any of the above, Bitcoin and blockchain management, 5G expansion, and uptake of commercial AI training, and the uptake of commercial augmented and virtual reality. And what's happening is that the power load for the cooling and the data processing is doing this. And it's like a tsunami just under the surface of the water right now. And we're about you guys, we're not about that, but that's a power load that's looking for firm, cheap, continuous, clean power resources. So you might very well be that we have you and a massive data processing facilities and a net power all kind of in one self-contained inside defense system. It's the only thing leaving is the CO2 pipe going out for storage because the power stays in-house and all consumed there. Just connecting dots in different kind of ways. You on yours, Damien, the startup time is your startup time is 2025, or how soon do you think you'll break ground? Well, that's probably an unfair question because you're probably working out some of the finer details just yet.
No, it's not an unfair question. We're currently looking for final investment decision in 2022. Hoping to start construction there at the end of 22, beginning of 23. And then getting to COD in that 2025, second half of 2025 timeframe.
Be cool. And I Will had to go, but I was curious. I was going to ask him what he expected the Colorado load demand for power demand was going to look like the next 5 years, because I'm sure it's not flat.
Yeah, it's definitely not flat, and not only is it growing, but we're seeing a lot of assets being planned to come offline, which is and with other clean resources that have wonderful attributes, but just like any resource, they bring to the table constraints that need to be addressed, and those constraints can really elevate power prices. And so we think that this project can help stabilize power prices in a clean way. And we're seeing a wealth of interest in the power offtake, even from firms that want to be at the table to broker and sell the power on our behalf. So the reception has been wonderful. We can get the power into Arizona. Arizona this summer, they're predicting over $200 a megawatt hour power prices because of the overcommitment on solar and things like this that are really just skyrocketing prices for the community. And so we need to protect the ratepayer. I know that all the utilities are constantly thinking about protecting their ratepayers, and that's why those utility commissions are in place. So we look forward to working with them. I would say in the WAPA region, in the Western Area Power Authority, they've recently partnered with the Loan Programs Office at the DOE to upgrade infrastructure in the area, because bringing power online is also going to require substantial upgrades to that system. And we think that initiative, having been kicked off since Jigger Shaw took the director position in the Loan Programs Office, along with Tracy LeBeau, CEO of WAPA, was a wonderful initiative. And I think that both Claude's project and the Coyote Clean Power project will benefit from more robust infrastructure that allows for more optionality from both producers and purchasers.
Wow. And this will apply to you too as well on this one, Claude. The ability to reach in and find funded programs, special programs. You talked about the DOE's loan program, or loan guarantee program. There's also a DOE tribal loan guarantee program. But you go over to the USDA, and Rural Utility Services also has loan guarantee programs for rural electrification, but also the affiliated services. I don't know if capture buckets inside what USDA is doing with rural development, but I guess maybe the one to ask would be the folks that are doing the work up in North Dakota with one of the cooperatives up there. But I mean, there's a lot of, sitting and listening to the group today, there's a lot of things to think about. And, I'm looking over here to see if I got someone. I literally do have 3 pages of notes. I do have one question for Claude. And my question is about power plant CO2 capture. How do you assess the impact of load volatility on the cost and operational flexibility of the Svante innovative design? That was one from our audience. And that's a good question because as we all know, the systems don't run flat 24 hours a day. So that means your CO2, that's for a power plant. The cement plant would be different, but how does that variability affect how you would operate?
We have a pretty constant load in our system because we run cycles very quickly, so it's a continuous catch and release. So I would say the capture plant itself is quite stable. We basically, if we have no flue gas, we stop. So we are basically dependent quite a bit about the operability of the cement factory. So if the kiln is working at full capacity, then we run at full capacity. If they run at 50%, then we have to cut down. So the variation of the load will come primarily from the variation of the cement kiln. But we're taking that into account. That's the beauty of solid sorbent compared to liquid systems, that we can turn down much more, and we can stop and start much faster than we could do on a gas to liquid system.
Yeah. And your power load would just move with your demand for the capture. It's not going to.
I'll give you the power load is coming. Two-thirds of the power load is coming from two pieces of equipment. Half of it is coming from the CO2 compression train, which takes the CO2, compress it. So it's a very constant load. And the other third of it is coming from the feed fan, which moves the flue gas to the capture plant, which also this one will vary with the availability of flue gas or not.
Sure.
And the rest is just pumps and heat exchanger and that you move around within the capture plant. So it's primarily two big sources of load.
It could float with the variability. Well, there's one last piece, and there's a lot more talk. Just as a side, you've been reading the news where people have been able to transact cargoes of crude oil, cargoes of LNG, cargoes of coal as neutral to no carbon commodity transactions. And how they're doing this primarily, to do a little bit of work at where it originates, but it's primarily being done with carbon offsets, carbon credits. And I've got to think that the work that both of your guys' technologies are delivering out there are ripe for creating carbon credits in a voluntary market. Maybe there's a mandatory market like California that extends to other parts of the country, but right now it's voluntary. The declaration to be carbon neutral or flat by 2030 by a large number of companies, I think, are going to rely on carbon credits to help them get there. In some cases, their business processes won't physically get there. They're going to have to do it some other kind of way. We've actually seen it. We've actually seen the cargoes transact with credits. You guys, the work that you're doing, you're going to sheet mount with CO2 to store it, and same with stuff from that power. You've got a huge volume of likely, if you aren't doing it, voluntary carbon credits that can go to the marketplace and add another revenue stream to the projects.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike, and it's something that we at 8 Rivers are also, this is another wonderful thing about the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, is they've got experience in that area. Although they don't have a federal tax base, they have experience in how to monetize these kinds of credits. And having a partner like that is very valuable from our perspective. And we think that monetizing the credits from this facility is not going to be all that difficult from our perspective. And I'll let Claude speak for himself, but I certainly don't think he's going to have any problem. I mean, Svante has done a wonderful job of bringing together a huge consortium of industrial partners, and so.
In fact, well, one of the folks that you interface with, Oxy, I believe they were on one side of a transaction of crude oil that went to an Indian refiner called Reliance, about 2 million barrels, and it transacted as carbon neutral. So I would say Oxy pretty adept at this as well. So Hats off. So we're at 3 o'clock, actually, edge over. Shane, I know you're on. Is there anything you want to toss in here? If there's, as we get ready to wrap it up, as I can tell you this much, awesome what you guys are doing with this Coyote Clean Power project.
No, I just enjoyed Claude's presentation as well too. Exciting stuff going on in our state, and I just want to leave everybody with saying, as the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, we're so interested in really embracing our regional resources. It's all encompassing. To really lean towards producing a product that's really positive to the environment, and we're all leaning that way, and we want to make a difference in the world today. So as the Ute people here, we're a part of the earth, and we'll go back to the earth when it's all said and done. And so as stewards of the land that we all are as human beings, it's so important that we're always continuing to strive to bring out the best and what we're capable of doing. And with that, I just say Taweak, until we meet again. Appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and Claude as well. Another great, awesome piece of activity taking place, game changing, as I see it and have said it. And Damien, thank you very much for bringing I consider this is kind of like your crew. You've kind of got the relationships. You put this together, got people to take time out of their busy days to be here, and we're happy to be able to host you all.
Yeah, hopefully in a year from now, we'll all have even more good news to be talking
Yeah,
about.
looking forward to it. We'll help you spread it out there. Alex, if you're there, I'm gonna flip over to you, and we'll do the wrap up and call it a day and say thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thank you to our speakers. This was, as Mike said, an awesome series of presentations and webinars. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We have another webinar briefing tomorrow, looking at tribal opportunities in the new energy market, looking at blue and green hydrogen in Indian country. That will be from noon to 1:30 Eastern. You see the URL at the top there. If you don't want to type all that in, you can just go to usca.org/events. And if you are subscribed to our mailing list, we will be sending out a reminder shortly. So with that, thank you again to everyone involved today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. We hope to see you tomorrow.
Yeah, and one last piece. We will be posting this live video recording and presentation materials that were given in a few days. You'll be able to go out and pull this down, send the link out to people that didn't get a chance to see it. It's not paywalled or anything, so just go right to USCA events, past events, and you'll find this. And please download it 1 million times. And we're done. I'll see you all later. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.